Okay, hi everybody. This is Kimberly from NeuroNeeds. I am here today for a Facebook Live event. I'm here with Emrys Tetu. She's going to be doing a presentation today called Regulating Ourselves and Those in Our Care. And I will hand this over to her so she can introduce herself and share a little bit more information. Welcome, Emrys.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. It's so nice to be here. So, hello. This talk is called Regulating Ourselves and Those in Our Care, and my name is Emrys. I help individuals and families and groups, as well as organizations, through my company, Decadent Wellness. So anything I'm talking about today, if you're interested in talking to me more, you can reach me through my website, which is decadent-wellness.com. And we really focus on luxuriating in the things that are supportive of our wellness. So when I first started doing this work, I really noticed that so much of health and wellness was talked about from a perspective of not fun, right? Don't do this, you have to do this, lots of discipline and willpower. And we knew that that wasn't working. We had the data that show that that actually isn't supportable long-term. And so I was really interested in how can we see what is in your life now that you love and build on that? How can we create more of what is working for you and add things in that continue to support your thriving? So I started my health counseling practice in 2005. I also teach yoga and meditation. And I've been exploring yoga, meditation, food ways, and more for over 30 years. I was essentially exploring somatic experiencing and nervous system regulation before we had those terms. And it's fine if you aren't familiar with those terms, those don't really mean anything to you. But if they do, that's a lot of what was revealed to me as I was doing the work I do. So I noticed things that were relevant to the work I was doing from behaviorists, occupational therapists, physical therapists, and my own clients and students as I was rolling along. And a lot of that has been what has led to what I'm talking about today, about regulating ourselves and those in our care. So in particular, let's go to our next slide here. Yeah, so it just tells you who I am. Of course, I made the slides and then I didn't put in my notes when I should show you each of them. So I'll try to pair them appropriately. So I had been teaching yoga, I had been doing health counseling, and at a certain point, I started working in behavioral needs, special needs classrooms. And I was teaching yoga in those classrooms. That's what I was there to do. And I really noticed, okay, I'm in these classrooms where there are more adults than there are students. And I'm trying to lead the students to do yoga. The very first classroom I was in, all the students were nonverbal. So I was really, even more than usual, watching their bodies for feedback. I'm doing that anyway, but we didn't also have the verbal feedback. So as I was asking them to do the first bits of movement, the first bits of breathing, I was so aware that they were picking up on, of course, everything in the room. And we all do this. We pick up on everything in our environment, whether we realize we're doing it or not. So as I was asking them to move their arms in a particular way or to breathe in a particular way, I could tell that their focus and their feeling of comfort with exploring these new things was really challenged by all of what they were picking up around them, everything going on with all the adults in the room. So I started to recognize for me to effectively teach these students, I need to also address what's going on with everyone else in the room, even though that's not what I'm actually supposed to be here to do. And this really ties into why this talk is titled Regulating Ourselves and Those We Support, because we're constantly picking up on each other, whether we know we are or not. So the behavior that was coming out of the students in the room was so directly tied to all the things going on with everybody else. And any sort of stress or challenge to regulation that the adults were experiencing was just coming through in a more heightened way through the students. So what this regulation means, what it actually is, let's see if our next slide is relevant here, is feeling a little bit more free in ourselves, right? So we want to be able to feel that we're enjoying the moment, that things are okay. We don't have to be feeling perfectly calm or perfectly delighted with how things are. But we want to be not in a heightened state of stress. So when we're regulated, I just want to emphasize, it doesn't mean that things have to go perfectly. It's normal for us to have a zone of regulation where we're okay-ish, really super okay, sort of okay, but not pushing out of that window into dysregulated states. So when we're getting into dysregulated states, we might not even know it to label it in the moment in ourselves, but what's happening is we're moving toward how our bodies would feel if there were a saber-toothed tiger nearby. Obviously, there's no saber-toothed tiger nearby, but that's the response our bodies evolved to have. Something's happening that I need to be not relaxed about. Something's happening that's a stressor that I need to shift states to deal with. So I need to come out of being pretty calm, pretty relaxed, pretty open to learning and to play and to all sorts of new growth. And so the states we usually talk about when we're in that, oh my gosh, there might be a saber-toothed tiger nearby state, are fight or flight, which were the two we talked about when I was growing up, but now we know about more. So it could be fight or flight, or it could be a freeze state where we sort of feel like a deer in the headlights. I don't really know how to handle this. It could be a fawn state where we go, oh my goodness, let me try to settle down. Whoever seems upset, let me try to make everything okay, because this is a distressing moment or situation. Or it could be a flop state, which is a high level of overwhelm where we just feel as if things are shutting down. And that could feel like it's hard to think straight, it's hard to focus, that could feel like fatigue. Each of these 5 states can have many different characteristics. So any of those 5 states can happen even when there's no saber-toothed tiger. And because of that, it's really helpful to know how to bring ourselves back to realizing, oh, I'm actually okay. So some modern examples of things that stress our regulation, that make it harder for us to feel regulated, could be the things that might seem more obvious, like something big happens. Maybe we see an accident when we're driving. Maybe somebody's very upset within our space. But a lot of those things that our bodies interpret as things aren't okay are just the things we're used to. It could be the million emails, waking up in the morning and thinking, oh my goodness, I know there are emails that I didn't respond to from yesterday. They're only going to be more today. That's stressing our bodies. It could be a family dynamic that's ongoing, that's challenging. It could even be foods that we're eating that are stressful for our bodies, right? We hear a lot about non-inflammatory ways of eating versus inflammatory ways of eating. So those inflammatory ways of eating are stressing our bodies. And I'm delineating this a little bit to really underline for you, you might not describe yourself as feeling stressed or feeling as if there's a saber-toothed tiger nearby, like that level of things aren't okay. But sometimes our bodies are still experiencing that load. And of course, we hear about the connection between chronic stress and less desirable health outcomes. So the pathway by which that is happening is this nervous system dysregulation that I'm talking about. When our nervous systems feel as if there's a saber-toothed tiger nearby and we're going into either fight or flight or freeze or fawn or flop. We might not even know we're going into these, but we're doing some version of things don't really feel super okay right now. What's happening inside our actual bodies is a deprioritization. So we're deprioritizing cardio health, reproductive health, digestion, immune health. We're deprioritizing parts of our brain. We're not in the parts of our brain that can really make discerning, considered decisions. Yeah. We're in the parts of our brain that are like, how do I survive this exact moment of stress? Not long-term, what's the best strategy? So you can see how when we're in these less regulated states, we're really prioritizing short-term outcome, not long-term outcome. And therefore, all those systems that are deprioritized, that are neglected, aren't getting their usual repair and maintenance and care. We can get away with that for a little while, but at some point it starts to catch up with us. And so that's where we get that link between chronic stress and all sorts of different health outcomes that are not desirable, because all of the systems that were neglected for their maintenance protocols start to have issues. And that can show up in one person as one diagnosis and in another person as another diagnosis. And in some people as something that doesn't end up with a diagnosis, right? Sometimes we're suffering from health things that we can't even quite pin down. So we see how important it is to cultivate being able to be regulated. And what we want for ourselves with regulation is not to get it perfectly. No human is in a regulated state 100% of the time. That's just not the way it works. So I'm just going to say that again, because I know so many of us are really good at achieving. We like to set goals and achieve them. So I'm going to say again, none of us is regulated 100% of the time. What we want to do is we want to be regulated more of the time, and we want it to be easier to return to regulation. So it's normal. Sometimes, we do get that stressful email, or we have a stressful interaction with a family member or a work associate or whomever. And we might feel, not so calm and focused, not so in our capacity to be playful and learning and open and flexible. But we want to have more of that elasticity to come back to that regulation. And so you might be thinking of someone right now in your life, someone in your family or in your care, or someone else where you're thinking, oh, I bet they could really benefit from some of these techniques. And maybe they could. None of us likes to be told that. You may have noticed, none of us likes to be told, you should really be doing. So what's so fascinating to me about regulation, we're going to do a few techniques together. Let's go to our next slide first. So what's so fascinating to me about regulation is that when we cultivate our own bodies feeling like, oh, I'm kind of okay right now, or I'm really okay right now, that spreads. So you may have had this experience already in either direction. So you may have had the experience of someone around you being dysregulated and how that felt in your body. So I'm going to slow down for a minute so that you can imagine that. So let's just for a moment imagine the effect. Picture one particular person being not so regulated. They're very upset. It could be that they're upset in a way that's angry. It could be that they're upset in a way that's sad or frustrated, but they're very clearly not feeling like everything's okay right now. And you're in their presence. And just see if you can notice when I imagine that scenario, what do I feel in my body? What happens in my body when I imagine being with that person who's pretty dysregulated? And you don't need to stay there. Just take the time it takes for you to just kind of notice if there's a feeling in your body, where it might be. It's not a quiz. You don't have to report your answers, but just, is there something that changes with how you're breathing? Is there something that changes with how you hold your body? Or maybe for you, it's more the pace of your thinking that you really notice changes. Sometimes we even feel where we are in our bodies differently. Like we start to feel very up in our heads and not so much able to feel where we're sitting or standing. So when you have a little bit of a sense of that, like I said, we're just checking on that for long enough to be able to see some markers, see what it looks like in yourself. You can come back to feeling okay right now. Maybe do a big breath for yourself and let it go. So this is a regulation technique. Anytime you exhale longer than you inhale. So maybe you're inhaling and then you're exhaling. Really lengthening out that exhalation. Anytime you're exhaling longer than you're inhaling, you're showing your body, we're okay right now. We can come into regulation. It usually takes more than one breath, you'll notice. And there's a specific trick for this. We're going to come back to what I had you do a moment ago, but I first want to follow through on this idea of breath for regulation. Sometimes it's hard to inhale and then make your exhalation longer. So here's the trick you can do. Exhale first. And then let your inhalation come in. And again, exhale. Make it as long as you can without distress, and then let that inhalation come whooshing in. And I'm going to let you keep going on that. The goal here is to have your exhalation be the part that you're doing on purpose. So you're pushing out the exhalation. That's the active part. And then the inhalation feels just like it's filling up. You're not so much pulling in inhalation as you create.
Oh God.
Breath again. And doing that breath you're just trying to make that exhalation longer. And the inhalation not as long. If you're finding this really helpful and you're not getting at all dizzy or lightheaded, you can keep going. If you're finding that you're getting at all dizzy or lightheaded at any point with any breath exercise, just come back to regular comfortable breath for you. And you don't have to do it the way I just taught it for it to work. Really, the primary takeaway for breathing for regulation is that you have a longer exhalation than inhalation, not to the point of distress. So the trick I just taught you about exhaling first is just to help you do that, because often we struggle to actually get the breath going, especially when we're in a state of less regulation. So I'm going to go back to talking about the exploration I just had you do of what does it feel like if you're in the presence of somebody who's not so regulated. So the reason I had you do that is because you may have trained yourself to get calm when other people are dysregulated, but your natural body response when other people are dysregulated is to actually pick up on that dysregulation. So the first place our bodies go to is also being a little bit off center, right? Somebody else is off center, I feel off center. And the same is true in the regulation direction. So you may have experienced this as well. If you, for example, listen to a guided meditation, or you listen to a really soothing audiobook, or you're in the presence of somebody who's just a very calm person, you might start to notice, oh, you might not call it this in your mind, but I would call it dropping into regulation. So it's like you're returning to feeling okay, feeling that sort of catch from the other person the state of regulation that they're in. So if all you take away from today is, oh, the state I'm in affects the state other people are in, the state other people are in affects the state I'm in, just stopping and noticing that can be really powerful, right? We're in a situation and we go, hold on a second. What's the sort of tone in the room? Maybe the way that I'm feeling isn't just me. Maybe I'm picking up on something here. And it also means that that impulse we sometimes have to teach other people the new thing, oh, let me have you do this breathing exercise that will help you feel more regulated. Sometimes we don't even have to do that, yeah? Especially if you're working with people in your care who are having challenges with regulation. If they're in a moment when they're not feeling very regulated, they might not be super receptive to being told how to breathe or how to do another regulation technique in that moment. But you can do it. So I demonstrated it in a way that you could really tell that I was doing it, because I wanted you to really know what I was doing. But you can breathe without other people knowing what pattern you're breathing in. So I could do an inhalation with a longer exhalation. Without you being able to hear that that's what I'm doing, right? The exhalation doesn't have to be through your mouth. You don't have to make a particular face. You don't have to make any sound. You could just start to notice with yourself. Can I exhale a little bit more slowly? I'm so used to demonstrating it with sound that sometimes it's hard for me to talk about it without going into making the sound. But just for you to feel empowered to be able to use this technique, whether you're in traffic, whether you're in a meeting, whether you're face-to-face with somebody who's having a hard time, it doesn't have to be a dramatic thing that you're doing. And breath is one of my favorite ways to talk about regulation because it's always with you. You don't have to bring a tool. So some of you might be familiar with various tools that help with regulation, such as fidget spinners. Yeah, those can be helpful for regulation. A weighted blanket or pillow can help us drop in. And I've been excited to see when I was first doing this work, very few people were talking about those tools for any population. And then I started seeing them used more for neurodivergent populations. And now some of those have become mainstream for all of us, whether we identify as neurodivergent or neurotypical, or we don't particularly identify in any category. And this has always been how I've seen regulation, is that it's for all of us. And some of the techniques that are used with certain populations really could be benefiting all of us. But I also feel that there can be limitations, not necessarily, but there can be limitations to things like a fidget spinner or a weighted blanket. And one of those limitations is simply that you have to have it with you. You might not have it with you in a certain circumstance. And there might be circumstances in which for some reason you can't have it with you. So I love things like the breath, which we're always allowed to have with us. We can use without having to have a conversation with anyone else about them. And as we use them, we're looking for a state change in ourselves. So this is really important. Sometimes we think, oh, I'm going to do this thing and that thing, and they're going to be good for me. When it comes to regulation techniques, it's not about just whether you did them or not. It's about whether or not you got the state change. So you could be diligently doing your breathing exercises and using a weighted blanket and using a fidget spinner and using some other techniques I'm going to talk about that don't require props, don't require objects. But if you're not actually feeling yourself drop into, oh yeah, I feel more okay. I feel regulated. Doesn't have to be perfect. Doesn't have to be totally calm and relaxed. But feeling resilient, feeling flexible. Yeah, we want to look for that state change. So if you're doing the techniques and you're not getting the state change, I encourage you to try different techniques until you find ones that actually allow you to get the state change. And the time frame you're looking for is about 1 to 3 minutes. So if you do a technique for a few seconds, I'm going to demonstrate one now while I'm talking. This one, you're going to take your pointer finger and put it inside your ear. Oh, and I forgot, I have the option to make it so that you can see me more clearly. So let me make that change here so that, sorry, I pressed the wrong thing. Let me see how I can come back to just us. Okay. So putting your finger inside that upper part of your ear. So you're not right toward your ear canal, you're just in that upper part. We're going to do it on both sides at the same time. And then we're going to make a little circle just around in that space. Hopefully I'm turning enough so you can see here. So as you're doing this, if you don't like it, don't do it. But if you're trying it, you might feel like nothing's happening. It just feels like a weird feeling in my ear. That's okay. We're going to try to go for about 1 to 3 minutes. And so you might not feel anything at first. But as you keep going, hopefully you'll start to kind of feel like, oh, yeah, you do feel kind of more settled, more okay, more at ease. And the 1 to 3 minutes I mentioned because sometimes we do it and we think nothing's happening and we stop. But if we had kept going, we actually would have gotten the state change. And then other times we're doing it and we do keep going and we're going and going and going and nothing's happening. So I like for you to have a range of time to know what to look for. So you might be finding, oh yeah, this is really comforting and soothing to me. I wouldn't do this in a board meeting, but I would definitely do this, in my house or sitting in my car before I get out or other circumstances. And when we're doing these tools for these techniques for regulation, just a reminder, we're not only getting the state change right now, we're also building our capacity to return to regulation more readily. So we might sometimes use these techniques in a moment that's challenging or right after a moment that's challenging as a way to regain our equilibrium and our steadiness and bring all those parasympathetic nervous system programs back online. So that's what I was talking about before, your ability to digest, to support your reproductive health, your cardio health, your immune system, your clear thinking, your ability to focus and learn and play and all those good things. So you might be noticing, okay, yeah, it does feel as if doing this is making a difference. You can do it for a little bit longer and then wrap up. Or you might be noticing this one's not really doing anything for me. The breath one did, but this one isn't. So that's about, I'm not sure exactly, I think that was about 2.5 minutes. So to give you a sense of about how long to try something like that. And then if that technique wasn't really your technique, the breath one didn't really do it for you, a lot of us hold jaw tension. So you might feel like, oh, that's a better place for me to focus. You can make your hand so that you have your knuckles as a ridge and slide them from below your cheekbone, down your jaw, and then down your chin, and down, I guess it's not your chin, right? But down the side of your jaw line and down onto the side of your throat. And this is another one you're going to do on both sides at the same time. It does make it a little tricky for me to talk while I'm doing it. So I can do one side while I'm demonstrating to you. And you'll notice I'm going a little bit slowly. You want to go slowly enough so that you're really feeling it. You're not rushing through it. Again, this is not about checking the box of I did it. This is about, can I actually feel something letting go, dropping in. Sometimes it makes the whole face sort of melt and relax. And this is another, I'm just pausing because like I said, it's easier to talk without doing it at the same time, but you might feel like, oh, this is starting to do something for me. This is another one you can do for about 1 to 3 minutes. And so what you want to do with these techniques is, like I said, use them in a moment when you feel as if they could be helpful, but then also use them regularly because you're actually training your systems to be in this regulated part of your nervous system. So you want to do, right now, the studies we have been based on doing them 3 times a day. And there haven't been a lot of studies, but we're seeing great results for people with PTSD being able to come out of that hyperactivation, which is that like fight or flight response, but could also lead to freeze or fawn or flop. Coming out of that hypervigilance, coming out of depression challenges associated with PTSD. So we're seeing in the studies that 3 times a day, 1 to 3 minutes each time, but actually getting the state change. I know I've already said it so many times, but it's easy to just remember, oh, do it 3 times a day, 1 to 3 minutes. You have to actually make sure that you feel the difference. We're seeing significantly increased elasticity, right? That capacity to come back to nervous system regulation and to spend more time in nervous system regulation. And even though that study is on a particular group, we're knowing, like I said before, that so many of these things that are identified as beneficial for one particular group are really beneficial for humans. If you have something that is happening that is really dysregulating and it feels like you would say, I'm not okay, right? So many of us still say we're okay, even when we're a little bit off or a lot off. But by the time we get to the point that we would say, I'm not okay right now, we need a bigger interrupt. Yeah. We're almost like, I don't even remember how to breathe right now. I know I'm supposed to be breathing. I know I am breathing, but the idea of making my exhalation longer, I just can't even process right now. In situations like that, we want a stronger input, such as cold water. There's really great support for the impact of a cold water blast as well. So some people, I'm sorry, I'm shuffling pages here because I somehow have my notes all out of order. Some people really benefit from, you may have heard about doing cold plunges or a cold shower. And for some of us, we're just feeling like that's never going to be me, or I definitely would need to work my way up to that. So even a small amount of cold can be very beneficial in just getting us to remember that there are other techniques. Remember that we can run those knuckles down, or do the little ear comfort, or do the breath, or reach for a weighted blanket. So the cold might be that you run cold water on the insides of your wrists where your veins are close to the surface, so you'll really get that cold right away. And that cold can sometimes just bring us back to, oh yeah, what else should I be doing for myself? Another way to use cold, some people like to splash cold water on their faces. There's a more emphatic version of that, which is a bowl of ice water and you plunge your face into it. I can tell you, I do not ever crave to do that myself, but some people, that sounds appealing. You can do that. And then the other version of that is to take an ice pack. So for an ice pack, you can just put it somewhere on you for just quick, on, off, just to get that feeling of, kind of snapping us back into focus. So when regulation is really extreme, that can be helpful. So how are we going to use this with the people who might be in our care? Well, we're going to give off our own regulation. We're going to signal that we're more regulated. So not only are we practicing more regulation, but then maybe when we're speaking, I'm starting to speak now a little bit more slowly, a little bit more mellow. So I'm actually allowing the people around me, or those of you here now, to experience that I'm slowing down. So it's not just that I'm breathing differently, it's that how I'm breathing is actually changing my state, and you're actually experiencing that state is different. It's not as engaging for a whole talk for me to be that slowed down. Yeah. So you might find that you can include others in your regulation after they've gotten multiple exposures of you being regulated. They might not be used to you being regulated when they're not regulated. So after you've used techniques to build your own regulation, and you've started showing up for them in a way that's really regulated. Again, still not telling them, you need to, because it doesn't always go so well. You might include them by saying, would you like to hold this for me for a minute? I used to do this with the students a lot. I would have a weighted bag. It was like a sandbag or a rice bag, a heavy bag. And if somebody was having a really hard time participating in the group environment, I would just say, could you hold this for me for a minute? And I didn't know if it was going to work or not. I thought they might throw it at me. They're having a really hard time right now. But I never had that happen. The students I was working with, whenever I did that, would say, oh, okay. And then I couldn't believe how much of a difference it would make in helping them regulate. So instead of telling them, again, like, you need to do this, I was asking them if they could help me with this. And similarly, again, I don't know what age you might be working with. Obviously, different techniques are going to work with different populations. But you might turn something into a more playful exercise. There's a way of teaching the breathing technique that pretends that it's hot chocolate. So you could do that with somebody if that's more engaging. Can you pretend you have a mug of hot chocolate and it's too hot to drink? You're going to inhale and smell the hot chocolate. You're going to exhale and you're going to blow on your hot chocolate to cool it down. When you use this technique of making your lips as if you were blowing through a straw, you inherently slow down your exhalation. So when you're doing that blowing technique as if there were an imaginary mug of hot chocolate, you don't even have to tell the person you're working with to make their exhalation longer than their inhalation. You could do something where you make it a contest of how long can you hold your hand in this bowl of ice water. So they've got their wrist in there as well. So just really finding these ways to incorporate the techniques without them being sort of more to do that might not feel as inviting. And part of what I specialize in my practice, which of course doesn't come through in today's presentation because of the nature of this format, is really customizing to where you are. So if you, let me go back to our, let's see, sorry, I'm not good at the multitasking, but I want to get you back to being able to see our slides here because I have another slide for you. If you would like to be in touch with me, you're welcome to be in touch with me so that we can create something that's more customized to what you'd like to learn about regulation or what would be relevant to your family or your work environment. I do this work with organizations as well. So that would be workshops, groups, things like that. And okay, there we go. Yeah. So thank you so much, Kim and NeuroNeeds, for having me talk a little bit about what regulation is, how we can get into it, how we can spread it to each other, why it's relevant, and such a foundation for all the other things that we might be trying to do.
Right. Thank you, Emrys. Those are some really good techniques. I know I've had to use a couple of those in the past for like panic attacks and things like that, especially the cold water one. That's always helped me. So thank you so much for joining us. If anybody has any questions for Emrys or would like to get in contact with her, as you can see, her website and email address is above. And thank you again for joining us. And we'll hope to see you again.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for tuning in, for those of you who tuned in.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.